Howdy! Today I want to talk to you about games. What are games? When we talk about game-based learning, let's first define what are actually games. And in this context, we mean any game, from a card game to board games. Like here's a board game you may be familiar with. Here's another board game that you may have played or not. I'll talk about that in a little bit. All the way to digital video games. So games they have defined rules. Games have an end state and games have a goal. That's my definition of what a game is. Now, there are many different definitions out there for what games are. Rules-based systems and so on, and you can look them up. I don't know that there is one common definition today that everybody agrees on. That's a game. So I keep it very simple. For me, a game exists when there are rules, when there is a goal, and when there is an end state. And that's different than play. You see, we can play anytime, just like in a sandbox. When children go out, play in the sandbox. They play and imagine things. I can play with cars or with puppets or anything. But there isn't necessarily a goal that the player is trying to accomplish, nor is there an end state. And what do I mean by end state? An end state is win, lose, or draw. Most board games you play have very set rules, defined rules, and have an end state where you win when everybody else loses. Except in Pandemic. That's one board game where you actually, with other people, play together against the board. Against the board. That's right, against the board. Unlike Clue, where you're playing against other people and following the rules set by the game, in Pandemic you actually play with people against the board. And that sounds, if you're not familiar with that type of game, that sounds very like, how could you play against the board? Now in a video game that makes a lot of sense because it's programmed in, but a board game is very static. You're correct. However, the rules set forth in playing Pandemic, they will challenge you, and it's going to be very difficult to win the game. And the board doesn't really do anything but presents different events that are occurring, that are unfolding as you're playing. And ultimately, you are playing against the board and trying to win. And it's a very challenging game, very enjoyable. I highly recommend it. If you'd like to check it out, and below is a link to the game. Please check it out and let me know what you think. Because the first time I've heard about it, it was in one of my classes. The students mentioned, oh yeah, we play this game against the board. It's like, you can't play a game against the board. The board doesn't do anything. And then they showed it to me and I've played it. And it's like, wow, this is not only is it a really good game, but it really changed my notion of what board games can and can't do. So there's a definite end state, right? You win, you lose, or like in chess, for example, you can have a draw. It's also a board game. And again, in play, there's no end state. There are no rules. And there's no goal. It's just we're playing. And so that's the difference for me in terms of play versus games. And games, for me, are also a medium, specifically digital games. Because digital games also contain, many of them contain content. And games like books, television, movies, music, are medium and can be used, in our case, in game-based learning, for learning, for students to master skills, knowledge, procedures, or facts. Games have been used to master new languages. And there's all different types of games out there. You say from card games to board games, and then we go to digital games. There's all different types of digital games. We have first-person shooters. We have puzzle games. We have adventure games, role-playing games. We have city building games, management games. And of course, we have people call it serious games. In serious games, it's not just educational games, but there's games for health. There's documentary games that are like a documentary movie or television. They're documenting a certain aspect of the human existence or of nature. There's historical games, recreating historical moments, interaction. Of course, there's games for education, educational or learning games, and there's games for science. University of Washington, for example, created a wonderful game called Folded, in which players, while playing and solving puzzle, are recreating and finding new proteins and becoming accidental scientists, even though they have not studied the science of protein folding. In the game, many proteins have been discovered by regular players just through solving puzzles. These are all different types of games, the same way as there's all different types of books. And I try to be specific when I talk about games, what kind of game I'm talking about. Because a lot of times we find people talk about games as one thing. But we don't do that with anything else. We don't do that with books. We don't talk about books as with one thing, right? Because there's a difference between a textbook, a cookbook, a reference book, fiction, non-fiction, and so on. But yet games, we all throw them into one bucket and talk about, oh, games are this, games are that. Well, we shouldn't do that. The same way as we don't do that with books. But we should be specific. What kind of game are we talking about? What kind of game is X or is Y? Or would we like to use, instead of just attributing to all games? Because the variety is huge, and there's new games coming out every week. Hundreds of them are being released on all platforms, on mobile devices, on PC, and on consoles. And there's also a fabulous resurgence in board games. New board games are regularly being developed, designed, and published. Too numerous to mention here. So that's my definition of games and the difference between play and games. Please feel free to leave your comments below, and if you like this video, please press like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.